So I'm going to sort of pick up on what Paul was saying, but I think also something what Amanda referred to at the beginning. So I said at the beginning that the pet ownership rates in Hong Kong is about 4 or 5% cats and dogs. So those are amongst the lowest in the world, right? Most countries have much higher rates than that. And you might argue that's a good thing because Hong Kong is maybe not a very suitable place to keep pets. On the other hand, we have very restrictive rules on people being allowed to keep pets in Hong Kong, particularly for dogs, right? So public housing, you basically need a doctor's certificate in order to be able to keep a dog, and in many private housing areas. So I was interested, Paul, because I mean, for many of those students, I got the impression they'd really never been involved with a pet before. So it was something new to them. It's not something that they already knew how to treat a pet. And one might argue that's maybe why animal welfare is a struggle in Hong Kong, because people don't already have the love of a pet. So what do you think are the important things that could be done in Hong Kong to address maybe both pet ownership and animal welfare by enabling people to have experience of animals in a safe environment for both the humans and for the pets? So maybe I'll give it to you first and then see whether the others would like to comment.
Well, thank you, John, for asking this. This is a really big question, actually. So we did a study before, and we asked the owners and the non-owners about the mental health and the physical health and the social well-being. Apparently, there are not so much difference between the owners and the non-owners, which is a new finding in the literature, because in the US, in the UK, in Australia, it's always the owners have better health status than the non-owners, okay? So we guess that the benefit is not so pronounced, possibly because the owners cannot take the dogs out so frequently and benefit physically. But on the other hand, the social well-being of owners are actually a little bit better than the non-owners. So we think within the four walls, within the families, the discussions about dogs or animals facilitate the social well-being, okay? Well, that's one issue. The other issue is, I'm not sure if not having pets in Hong Kong is a good thing or not, as you ask. As you said, one of the things that people have kind of a negative attitude about animals is the lack of exposure. If we went to some talks and asked people, when was the last time you see a live animal? People would say, well, 2 months ago, I went to a market and saw a chicken. And that's basically it, right? So having exposure to animals would be a good thing, at least, to educate the people that the human beings are not the only species in the city. We have to live under the One Health approach. We have to live with animals in a city. But then I guess for the welfare of pets or animals, whether they are living in a small compartment or not is one thing, but educating the owners would be the most crucial thing to do. So they need to be educated that they need to protect the welfare of the animals, take them out, make sure that they are not obese because of not going out, and things like this. So possibly SPCA can play a big role in doing that.
Yes, I agree with everything that Paul said, but I think it's very important that we understand what responsible pet ownership looks like. And unfortunately, we don't at the moment have legislation that requires people to be responsible owners. We have legislation that is based on the duty to ensure that your animal doesn't suffer from overt cruelty, but there's nothing in the legislation that relates to welfare. And as such, currently, there's no requirement that people take their pets out or that people walk their pets or that people do any of the nice things that Paul's been talking about. So it's very important that you take the opportunity right now. AFCD is currently doing a consultation on enhancing animal welfare in Hong Kong. And there is a consultation paper on the AFCD's website, which you can all go and look at and give your views on. And I encourage you to support the proposals to change the basis of the law in Hong Kong. The idea is that a lot of the things that the SPCA and I have been saying for many years are finally going to be taken up. And that is that no longer will we have a backward-looking law that only looks at prevention of cruelty, but we will have a forward-looking law that looks at the duty of care for animals in Hong Kong and requires people to give their animals a life worth living. So please do go on the AFCD's website. Please do support the proposals to enhance animal welfare. Please take a look at my webpage at Hong Kong U in the Law Faculty, where I have uploaded today my own submission to AFCD and to the Legislative Council on this point. And please copy and paste as much as you like, but do support these proposals, because we have the opportunity finally to make a difference to the way that pets are kept in Hong Kong, and not just pets, the way that food animals are treated, the way that animals in exhibitions and other public places are treated, the way that animals are treated in labs, the way that animals are treated that are living wild. So you have an opportunity to affect the real lives of animals everywhere if you support these proposals that AFCD has finally got around to making. So please do take the opportunity to do that. You only have till the end of this month to make your views known.
So is there any reason to believe that attitudes towards pets and looking after them, welfare, that side of welfare, is linked to how people feel about animals being used for research or wild animal welfare? Do we know anything about these issues?
I think that most members of the public don't think very hard. I mean, you're a self-selected group. I mean, you've come along today to a talk at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon about animals. So obviously you are the types of people that are thinking about these issues. But I don't think that the people on the street are thinking about animals in labs. I certainly don't think they're thinking about wild animals. They're certainly not thinking about wildlife trade. It's been very difficult, and I'm sure Dave can speak to that, to get traction in relation to people caring about endangered species. People think it's not a problem. They don't think it's got anything to do with them. So because they don't have a great big hunting trophy hanging on their walls, they think it's not their problem. But of course, it's everybody's problem, because it is organised crime. It is coming through our territory, and it's being laundered in some cases as legal product, when in fact it's illegal product. So it is all of our problems, and I think we all care about the fact that other species are going extinct because we're not paying enough attention.
So Kelvin and David, maybe I can push you guys a little bit to, do you see a connection between our attitudes, welfare, of different types of animals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think touching on what Paul was mentioning earlier, was really empathy, and being able to empathize with the animal. And exposure to animals surely can contribute to empathy, the development of empathy. Having that emotional connection to another species can be very powerful. And I think this is really, it's empathy that I think underpins a lot of the environmental movement that I think personally is really taking off in Hong Kong and China as well. And as evidence of that, we see more and more student groups that are engaged and active on issues like this, or concerned about the environment and other green issues. So it's very encouraging to see the younger generation really taking a different stance than perhaps their parents and their grandparents did, with not just animal welfare issues, but also with environmental issues in general. So I sort of remain a hopeless optimist on some of these things. And so if we can stem the tide of the demand at this juncture and allow species to persist into the future, then there may be hope for some sustainable actions.
So Kelvin, you talked about the exciting part of, it's not organs, but it's organoids, right? So do you think that's basically people are doing it to save money, or you think there is really, that's also being driven by changing attitudes to welfare?
I think it's both. Definitely it's like, on one hand, building organoids, of course, much more human-like instead of animal. Humans are quite different from other animals. So having something that is done on human cells is supposed to be more representative in some ways. But at the same time, you can reduce a lot of animal experiments because you're doing it on human cells, and which will likely eliminate those experiments that are not going to be fruitful at all in animals. So I think it's one stone, two birds kind of thing, you know. So I don't think people started organoid for the benefits of animal welfare, but it definitely benefited the animal as well. So may I speak a bit on pets? I'm a layman in terms of pets. I'm not an expert at all. But I would like to say that, yes, I mean, in Hong Kong, I wasn't a pet owner before. I started have my own pets about 10 years ago, which I love now. And the thing is, I noticed when pets are when people see pets, they always have a smiley face. So even people who are depressed or patients who are depressed, whenever they see pets, most of them are much more happy than before, or students, as you see. So, but what happened is sometimes some people, non-pet owners, hate animals because some pet owners are being not responsible. So I think it's a vicious cycle. If pet owners are keeping their pets nicely, they keep them from disturbing others, they clean up before, then people who are not pet owners will be more receptive to them and be more likely to interact with them and understand the benefits of interacting with pets. So I think it's a vicious cycle, and I'm actually very optimistic. In the past few years, I'm seeing more and more places and more people who are open to pet owners, which I am one of them. And I think there's a good trend, and with the legislations or the impacts, I think this is a good direction.
Thank you all very much. So can I, just to round off this session, maybe ask you each just to say one key research theme which you think can help significantly. It doesn't necessarily have to be your own research theme, although it may well be, but some area where you think academics can help improve animal welfare in the broadest sense, whether it's wild animals or lab animals or pets. Paul?
Well, the science about human-animal interactions are not so solid. Many of the studies have done before, it's not so rigorous. So if there are some more studies that can measure the biological changes of the animals when they interact with human beings, vice versa, measuring the biological changes while they interact with the animals. If we can prove that, the improvement of endorphins or whatever while they are interacting, that would be much more convincing than using the subjective report scales data.
Well, that's a tough question. I'm a firm believer in the type of programs that Paul was presenting, because, you know, the unfortunate consequence of being a university professor is that, like was said earlier, we preach to the choir, right? Where, you know, many of my students that are in ecology and biodiversity, they're there because they're passionate about environmental issues. So I'm just, you know, preaching to people who have the same ethics and ideals that I might have. But early childhood education is where you can develop that empathy for wildlife, and I think that empathy is a lifelong characteristic and something that affects decision making. You know, for example, many people choose their own diet based on empathy towards animals. And I think that when we look at some of the conservation success stories that we've had in this region, a lot of those have been pushed by NGOs and celebrities who have brought awareness to these issues. You know, in many cases, people do things out of habit and out of tradition. Shark fin soup, great example of that. Okay. Debatable, I guess. But breaking those traditions and using empathy as a vehicle for doing so, I think, is really important.
I think for animal research, we must do more research on understanding the pain and distress of the animal. And I don't think enough is done yet. There's a lot of research on this, but I think not enough is done. Because if you understand how animals feel the pain or distress or fear, then you know how to tackle them. And I think knowing how to tackle them will greatly improve the welfare of animals in laboratories.
As a lawyer, I think the most important thing is that we consider how we can use the law to change the world to be a better place for animals. And that's what I try to teach in my animal law course every year. The students come in and they think that really we're just going to talk about dogs and cats for 12 weeks, and we don't. We talk about law, and we talk about philosophy, and we talk about animal welfare science, and we talk about how all of those things need to influence one another, that you can't have good law unless it's based on good animal welfare science. And we talk about how it's one thing to say we've got laws and to point the finger at perhaps at countries that don't have laws and say, well, aren't we better? But in fact, legislation is only as good as what it's actually able to do. And a lot of the legislation that we have, unfortunately, doesn't do what it says it's going to do. And only when those problems are pointed out and we sit down and start to think about the kinds of law reform that we need, and then we take the opportunity to change our laws, can the situation be improved for other species. And where those opportunities arise and we know what we need to do, we need to all get on board and make sure those things happen.
Do we have a question or a point somebody wants to make? Yes. Can we bring the mic to this young man here?
So my name is Kelvin. I was a research staff in the Faculty of Education. So my question is, do you consider the relatively lacking of, concern on animals a problem related to really a lack of formal education in the curriculum, or it's more like a culture matter? Because, I have pets in my home, but my parents don't consider this as a good thing, because they think that pets or animals, like dogs, are only for tools. A lot of Chinese are keeping their dogs as a guard dogs at home, and a lot of people just take birds as a way to show off themselves. Do you consider this is more related a cultural problem, or is simply a lack of education?
Well, this is a very difficult question, honestly speaking, because
just say we don't know the answer.
my view, obviously, animal has not been a discussed topic or prioritized topic within the curriculum in probably in Asia in general, right? Then again, it's a cultural issue too, and now people are still debating about whether we should keep dogs like this or whether we should keep dogs, the mongrel dogs for security guard dogs and whatever. So we still have these kind of debates within the culture. And caring too much for the dogs would be like a sin, even within the family for debates, So there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed. But that's why having this kind of platform is a really crucial thing.
So maybe I'm going to bring Amanda in again, because one of the things that fascinated me was with some of Amanda's previous work on animal welfare is from my perspective, the government didn't really want to change the animal welfare laws. But the interesting thing was that whichever side you're on, so today we're in this very calm environment. There may be people outside there demonstrating. So whichever side you're on in Hong Kong, it doesn't matter whether you want to label yourself as a pan-Democrat or as a pro-Beijing, still everybody believes in animal welfare, or at least there are people within all those groups. So it seems to be an issue that people feel strongly about, which has nothing to do with politics, if I can put it that way. So yes, there may be cultural elements, but it's not a political culture element. So I think it's possible to find people who want to change the world and improve it, who have, regardless of your political views. So in Hong Kong, that means it's an opportunity, right? Because I think that's why the law got changed, is because Amanda and the SPCA found people across the different groups in LegCo who said, yes, we need to change the law. So if it is culture, I think it's the culture that we can change, because we can find leadership of people in society who want to change and improve things. That's a different way of answering your question, perhaps. Yes, we've got somebody back here.
Thank you for these brilliant talks, right? And actually, I want to express my ground that I fully support animals' welfare. But I would like to share with you an experience because some friends of my own and also one of my family member, although it may sound a bit strange to you, they are really afraid of dogs. Okay, I don't know whether you understand. A small percentage of people are really afraid of dogs. And sometimes when I go out to the street with my family member, and the people is going to have dogs with them, and she's always hiding behind me and doing things. But people don't understand. They say that, oh, it's cute. Do you have a touch on it? And the family member actually will, no, please don't, and is shaking. But I think that and sometimes when I ask, can you please take the lead of your own dog, please? And some guys will say to me that, no need, because it will restrict the freedom of the dog. Okay, the dog have to move around, you know. You restrict its freedom. I don't understand why you're so afraid of that. Okay, be brave next time. Carry on. Well, I do find from this incident, although it's a bit strange to you, would that be a strike of the balance between animal welfare and also a small group of people who really don't like it? And because to my family member,
Sure.
by law, it's really like a nuisance to me.
I think Kelvin made the point very well. It's about education, and I think it's education of both sides. It's education of the pet owner, but it's also education of the non-pet owner. So actually, I don't find your story surprising. About 10 years ago, when my children were young, I was walking around Wan Chai trying to buy them a bicycle. And I walked into a bicycle shop, and I got bitten by a dog. And I mean, I got bitten with drawing blood. So I actually had to go and have a tetanus injection. My wife wanted me to have a rabies shot, but I wasn't going to do that. But I mean, so that experience, yes, even if it hasn't happened to you personally, you've heard a story as somebody who had a traumatic experience with an animal. This is reality. People have those experiences. The question is, do you have some other education or experience to realize that actually most dogs are like him, who are very tame and friendly, but if you've only ever had a negative experience, you don't realize, or you've only ever heard a negative experience. And I think you've also illustrated very nicely, right? If the pet owner doesn't understand their responsibilities, particularly in an urban environment, to keep their pet on a leash, then yes, that clearly also is going to be a problem, right? That also makes people paranoid. Come on, it's not just me, right? Come on, who would like to comment? Yes, Kelvin?
I comment because I have the same feeling as you. I've seen many people who are so irresponsible that their dogs are barking and they're very big and they just let them in the park running around. So that's what I mean when I say a vicious cycle. If you have more and more people like this, then more and more people are antagonistic against pet owners, although most of the pets are not like that at all. So I think education, as you said, is very important for pet owners. You have to respect each other. You have to respect the rights, not the rights, I would say. You have to respect that some non-owners, they don't hate dogs, but they're just afraid or whatever experience, they don't like to touch dogs. You have to respect them. If you have a dog which is more fierce, big, you have to be careful when they go on the street. I think this is very mutual respect for everybody, which I hopefully, if more people are more responsible, then they dog owners and non-dog owners can live happily together.
Yes, the lady there and then the gentleman.
Hi, thank you all for your lovely talks. I know it didn't come up today, but I did want to ask about animals in captivity, like we have at Hong Kong Botanical Gardens, and I guess also Ocean Park, although I suppose that's privately owned. I was just wondering, because you were saying the importance of research and statistics and so on, I was just wondering if you know of any studies that are happening with animals in captivity in Hong Kong at the moment. And also, I guess as a second question, what your opinion is on the animal welfare laws, how they're going to affect the animals in captivity at the moment, and whether we need additional ones, or what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Shall I answer that? I'm not aware of any, certainly no studies in my faculty going on in relation to animals in captivity. I mean, certainly animals in captivity studies are transferable across jurisdictions because they're generally animal welfare science studies. So a study that suggests that an animal in a certain of a certain species in a certain type of confinement will suffer in a particular way is obviously transferable to Hong Kong. So we don't necessarily need to do studies within this jurisdiction to make those points. The duty of care issue that I raised earlier will not just affect animals that are kept as pets, it will affect animals in every context. So currently the legislation that controls the keeping of animals in Hong Kong involves a series of regulations that are about sanitary conditions and safety of the public. And there is nothing in them at all about animal welfare. So if the amendment to CAP 169 that's being proposed goes through, that will make a difference for animals in captivity. Because what the amendment will do is it will require that every animal in whatever context, so we're not just talking about pets, we're talking about other animals as well, every animal in whatever context will have to have its needs met on a reasonable basis. So for an animal that's confined in a zoo, for example, or in Ocean Park, what its reasonable needs might be can be objectively quantified, and then that duty of care can be applied to that particular animal. So it is an absolute game changer for animals in all contexts. And that's one of the reasons why everybody in this room, whether they care about dogs and cats or not, should be supporting the CAP 169 amendment, because it's not just going to affect dogs and cats.
Amanda, can I ask you, one thing nobody has mentioned so far is breeding. So we know that in Hong Kong there are a lot of issues around breeding. So how will this fit into that?
Well, when we got the breeding law passed a couple of years ago, which introduced requirements for every person that is breeding dogs, and it will be rolled out to other species too, but at the moment it affects dog breeding. Every person who breeds dogs and sells their dogs now is required to have a license, which means that most of the breeders that previously were arguing they were hobby breeders, in fact they were puppy mills, now has to have a license. So AFCD has the right to access their premises and check on the welfare of their animals. What we also got written into that law, the SPCA and I, was that all breeders owe their animals a duty of care. So it was the first duty of care that had ever been recognised in animal welfare legislation, and now, 2 years later, it should be rolled out for all of the other animals and all of the other different contexts in which animals are kept. That's what this amendment to CAP 169 will do. It will roll out that duty of care that we've already got our foot in the door on in relation to pet breeding.
Thank you. There was a gentleman here, I think, next.
So this question is for Kelvin. I was wondering if you could comment on sort of what the restraints or prospects for the further development of more robust modeling, like you developed in your lab, right? So what are the prospects of getting to sort of like full human simulation in the future to be able to completely obviate, you know, like the use of animals in testing in general? And then as sort of a related sort of curiosity on the policy level, how many like public initiatives are there and funding to develop these models? Are they primarily being developed like in private context and being like patented by pharmaceutical companies and things like that? Like, so what is sort of is the nature of sort of like the collective development of this type of technology?
Okay, so for your first question, I think in organoids that I show you is just a beginning. So these are very primitive, and of course it cannot replace animals yet in terms of, for example, they don't have immune cells, which we have. They don't have some structures, they don't have blood supplies and all these things. But I think as the technology develops, they would more and more likely mimic the real organs, to the point that maybe we can just test drugs on these organs without going through animal experiments. And people will accept these drugs to go into clinical trial without animal experiments. I think that's the way to go if possible. Okay, so for your second question, there are initiatives, not in Hong Kong. I don't think there's initiative in Hong Kong, but at least in England or in Australia, that they have, for example, I think it's in England, they have some initiative in the animal welfare. And specifically, they stated that more research should be done on these animal welfare kind of studies. I don't know exactly what grants are available for these, but I'm sure with these official documents coming out, there will be more incentive for the government or grant agency to promote the animal welfare research.
Yeah, I think the issue of ownership is a pretty important one, right? Because I think there is, because I'm interested in innovation technology issues, so there's a vast amount of money being poured into the models, I think. That's the honest truth. But whether the knowledge ultimately will be open access or will be patented is a challenge, I think. That is still likely to be a problem, right? I mean, Hong Kong, in theory, you could get money. So I sit on the grant review board of the Food and Health Bureau here. So it wouldn't be a problem to get some research funding here. But I think the sums of research funding in Hong Kong are tiny compared to the sums of money that are needed to do some of these things. So you basically have to go into much deeper pools like the NIH in the US or the National Science Foundation in China to do the really big stuff, right? But I think that still is very small money compared to the money that the private sector, the venture capitalists can turn up for people who come up with the really big modeling stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. Just talk about patenting for these technology. So far, I don't think it's a big problem yet. For example, organoids. These are not, I mean, you can find the information on how to make these organoids in public domain. They're not really secrets. So, for example, our collaborator, they welcome many, many people from around the world to go to Holland, to the center, to learn in how to make these organoids. So, in terms of patenting for these issues, it's not really a problem yet. But yes, the money going into these research, of course, the drug company are not going to do it unless there's an incentive for them to do it. So whether the government can give them some incentive to do this kind of research, I don't know. Maybe it's open for discussion.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. I think do we have a last question? If not, please join me in thanking our speakers for their time.